It's probably one of the oldest traditions of amateur radio. It has always been the means by which you got certificates, awards. You had to get the cards, you had to get the QSL cards, and that was the only way that the league would pass them out, give you awards. So it was a big issue, and it was the strategy that went into getting QSL cards was part of the game, and it was. But there was the hobby. I know there's a lot of hams here that don't have real big stations, the old traditional big amateur stations where you would have the chance to work a lot of DX, and that was a big part of the hobby back then, was because it was the interesting aspect of how many countries and how many different remote parts of the world that you've communicated with, and that was collecting those cards was a big part of it. So anyway, we go on to the. Well, first of all, I heard you guys talking about definitions earlier, and of course that's the definition of QSL. Is can you acknowledge the receipt? And it's like all of the Q signs. There's a question, and then there's the response. You say QSL, and they say, yeah, I can QSL. So it's a two-way Q signal. So anyway, there are three ways right now that you can get QSLs. You can get electronic, the physical cards, and the newer system, which is OQRS. And it's really a hybrid system. As it says, it's a hybrid between the physical paper card and the electronic card. And it is now almost the sole way to get cards from DXpeditions. Almost all of them now use OQRS. And of course, OQRS, the reason that they use it is because it brings revenue into the organization because they have a certain fee that they put up there that you have to pay in order to get that card from OQRS. And normally it's usually around $5, $5 to $7 to $8 to get the first one, and then they'll give them to you for all of the contacts that you made to that DXpedition. But it gives the club some revenue from the QSLs that they send back. And the other thing you got to realize that in this QSL business, on the paper side of it, is that there are a lot of ham radio operators in third world countries where the revenue from QSLing is a significant part of their revenue. It represents, and so you're going to find a lot of stations that don't QSL without that money coming in the envelope. They won't give you the card back. It won't send it back to you. So you've got to have to realize that you're going to have to pay that individual in order to get the card back. But that's just part of learning some of the aspects of it. You're going back to the strategy of getting cards, because back long before the internet and everything else, it used to be all of this QSL business and all the DX spotting was done on 2-meter handhelds, 2-meter radios. People would just pick up their microphone on 2 meters and say, Bahrain is on 20 CW on this frequency. And that's how the spotting was done. And at the same time, there were a lot of discussions about that particular operator on how to get a card from him. What was his, how did you deal with him? And you're right, there was a lot of countries like India, any of the really poverty-stricken third world countries, that was a frequent problem of getting the card. And so on our part, we would go through a lot of tricks and trying to do it. And that's one of the things that some of you guys probably have never seen this set, but this was the old traditional way that you did it. You had this inside card, which you filled out put your name and your address on it, and you didn't put a stamp on it. You just put your own return address on there. and then you put $2 or $3 or whatever it is. You went to the bank, you went down to the bank and you got a handful of brand new $1 bills. Because believe it or not, there were all guys out there, hams on the other side, who felt insulted if you sent them a used $1 bill. They insisted on it being a brand new $1 bill, or two of them in the envelope. So you had to go get new. So what you would do is you would take those $2 and you would put it in here. You would close the flap, put your card in here, and then you would put it in the envelope, which you would then affix a U.S. airmail stamp to. And of course, the one thing you wanted to do was you wanted to make sure that you put this end down, because if he used a knife to cut this one open, you didn't want the flap on yours to be cut off also. So that was one way of doing it. Now this clearly was a trademark. I mean, this kind of implied a certain thing, that this was an amateur radio thing. So you left all call signs off of it. The address, you addressed the card, the envelope, to the person's name and the address, whatever you had, and you didn't put call signs on it or anything like that. Then there was this, which was even tried to be even more stealthy about this whole thing. The same thing. You'd put the $2 in here, stick your card and everything in, and that's how you would try to defeat these guys who were collecting the money in the post offices. And sometimes you would get the operators on the other end that would tell you that it's really hard to get a card. So if you really needed it, you would send it, and you would send it by registered mail. So now you're talking about a $15 to $20 fee to get that card. But for me, I'm three things away from having everyone in the world. All of them. And I need three more. And if those three stations, North Korea, Scarborough Reef, and Crozet, if they came on the air, I'd pay the $15 easily to get those three cards. So it's that part of the hobby that you really have to work on. So anyway, the OQRS, we've talked about that, the physical card, then we're going to talk a little bit about the electronic. And of course, I think everybody is well aware that Logbook of the World is pretty much the means by which a lot of QSLing is done now. It's the problem with LOTW, it's the only way that the league will give you awards, besides the paper cards. You can still submit your paper cards to be checked, but they will not accept EQSL, QRZ, Club Log, any of these other. If you want any of those awards, you want the DXCC, the VHF, UHF, DX or CC, the worked all states or worked all continents, and now, since there is some concern about the future of some of these magazines, the Worked All Zones award is now up on LOTW. And so now you can get them all from that. I don't know if any of you guys use EQSL here. It was popular for a while with the digital guys. They were really popular for digital. It's kind of faded. I don't see much EQSLing going on anymore. Pretty much everybody has moved up to LOTW. QRZ.com, still, it's out there. You can get it. A lot of people still use it, but not nearly as much. And of course, the pros and cons with the electronic. No, you don't have to deal with paying these exorbitant mailing fees or anything like that, but at the same time, you don't have that nice little card to hang on to. And one of these things, I'm going to let Ron here talk about his collection of cards, and he's going to show you his book of how he's done it. And when you see how he's arranged it, you'll get a feel for how some people really take great pride in their collection of cards, and at the same time, a lot of hams have taken great pride in the card they send out. They'll spend a lot of time and a lot of energy on it. And I'll talk a little bit about that also. So then the physical cards. The international part, then there's the direct mailing to the operator. Then there is the direct mail to a foreign or a U.S. QSL manager. Often DX stations will have QSL managers, and and if you're lucky, they'll be here in the United States. So instead of having to send that international stamp and taking all that time, the local guy will get you'll get a foreign QSL card from a local QSL manager. The other way is, of course, is with the outgoing QSL bureau, and that's what we as the club support as the members. It's one of the membership benefits that we have, is that if you want club cards, QSL cards that you want to get to foreign operators, we batch them all up and we send them up to the league. Now, we used to do that monthly. We used to, every month, we would send, I would collect the cards at the meeting, and we'd batch them up, send them up there, and it was, usually about $10 or $15, including the postage. But now the league has really jacked the price of that service up to the point where we now only do it quarterly, but we still do it. So if anybody here who is a DX operator wants to use that service, you bring the cards to me, I batch them all up, and I put them in the right order, and then I send them up to the league. Now, one of the things that I want to point out to you guys who are going to use this service that we got, there's such a thing as called a DX via station. In other words, when you work a DX station, there's frequently somebody else who is his QSL manager. So if you're working a DXpedition or a rare station, you got to go on to some of these services and look up to see who his QSL manager is. And because I see it a lot of times here, the members here will give me cards, and you can tell just by the call sign that it is a DXpedition or it's a special event station, which means somebody that if you send that card through the league to their QSL bureau in that country, it's not going anywhere. It's staying there because it doesn't have the via station. You have to put that on the card. And if you look at a QSL card, frequently there's a box for the station you worked, and right above it, it says via. And it says that's who you actually send the card to. He gets that card, and then he sees that it's the DXpedition. That's how you get the card back. Is that clear to everybody how that works? It's an important issue. I mean, it's one of the messages I hope to leave with you here, is that knowing who your QSL manager is and who the guy is that gets that card is an important aspect. There is the outgoing QSL services, which used to be quite popular. There used to be commercial guys who would do it, like WF5E. There were other groups that would do this, and you would send them the cards, and they had a certain fee, and they would do much like what the ARRLs. They would batch them up, and they would send them to that local QSL bureau of the country. Again, one of the things I should say is that nearly all of the countries that belong to the International Amateur Radio Union maintain a QSL bureau in their country. Now, in the United States, every call zone has their own QSL bureau. But in Great Britain, Scotland, many other countries, most of the bigger countries, there's some of the third world countries that don't have it, but nearly all of them do. If you look on the DXCC list, you can see which countries do and do not have an outgoing or an incoming QSL bureau. You have to go to the list. You have to go to the DXCC list and look on there, and it'll have down at the bottom, it's a section of where all the notes are. One of the notes will have which countries still maintain or don't have a QSL bureau any longer. Of course, then there used to be, you know, a lot of the groups like FIST, QCW.
Have closed them up. The LOTW has taken those guys out of it completely. So then the other thing is the incoming bureaus. Now, it's the exact opposite. What happens is everybody from a foreign country, they send their outgoing cards to their QSL bureau. They batch them up, and then they send them to either the 4 or the 5. Now, in Virginia or in the 4 area, the Sterling Amateur Radio Group does all of the 2s, the 2-letter prefixes, and then the group down in Charlotte, North Carolina, the Amateur Radio Club down there, they do all of the Ks, the Ws, the 1-letter prefixes. So my bureau is down in North Carolina, but my sorter, the guy that does all of the Zs, he's actually in Florida. So the cards, when I get cards through the bureau, my envelopes come with a postmarked Florida postmark on them, and that's how the bureau cards that come through that process get to me, is from Florida. But it works beautifully. And of course, then, and from a domestic side, none of these, none of the QSL services, outgoing or incoming from the ARRL, deal with domestic cards. If you want a card from another U.S. ham, the only way I know to do it is direct mail. The QSL services won't deal with them. Exactly what I wanted to think is down here. You need to make sure that you know on there exactly the routing of how to get that card. So you want to say, if the card, if the DX, it says through the LZ Bureau or from a particular call sign, but you got to have that on there if you really want to get that. And here's a couple of places where you can look them up to see where the routes are, to find the route managers or the QSL managers. Is you can go to the Go list, dailydx, QRZ.com. The call books still does it. And then this guy, this guy in Italy, IK3QAR, he maintains a QSL routing website, which is very good. He's really accurate as far as the information that he presents on there. Just go to ik3qar.it. It's Italy. It's an Italian station. Yeah. And you can get it right off. I mean, it'll pop right off of Google, or you can just enter that into your browser and it'll come back. But he's really good. It's one of the best. If you use an electronic logging program, almost all of them use what is called a country file, and it's standard extension for a country file, and almost all of them use the same format. And the guy out in Colorado, and I can't think of his call right now, but anyway, he's the guy that maintains that. And he frequently has real accurate routing in there. So if you punch in, when you enter that DX call sign into your log to log that QSO, if he has a good QSL route manager for it, it'll pop. It'll come right back at you, and it's usually quite accurate. I've checked it time and time again, and it's very, very good. So that's another resource that you can use if you're using an electronic logging program. If you're not, you got to go to these. You got to go to the manual sites and look it up. Okay, now here's the problem with the QSLing from our side. Is you got to realize that there's probably, most of the hams, a lot of good portion of the hams are here in North America. And you got to realize that the guy on the other end that you're trying to get a card from is probably got 1,000 cards from Grid Square FM 18. I mean, FM 18 is where we're at. And he's probably sitting on a bunch of cards. And the last thing he wants is another stinking North American QSL card. So you really got to think through how do you get him to get him to do that. And that's where the real kind of the trick is, because that's the thing is, what strategy do you use to entice him to send it, besides the $3 or the $2 that you got in there? Because he may just take that $2 and you may never see the card, or it may come back through the bureau. But if there's something about your card that he likes, he's probably going to respond to it. So be careful about that. Realize you got to go through the thought process here of realizing that you're the last thing he wants to hear from. He's got more stinking cards of North America, of Vienna, Virginia, of Annandale, Virginia than he'll ever need. So anyway, it's besides the incentives are. You want to use the high-end stock cards. Don't go there's those cheap the cheap QSL route, which is just a single color, flat, no gloss, no nothing. We used to call them contest cards, and they're cheap. You can get 1,000 of them printed for $25-$30, something like that. You're going to get little or no response from those. Those are the kind of things that end up in the trash can, even if your $2 is in the envelope. Or you might get a card back, but it's going to come through the bureau or some other way. List your equipment. There's a lot of guys on the other end that like to see what you're using. So when you're writing down on your QSL cards, even if you have to write it in, write down what you're using, what your antenna is, and what equipment you use to make that contact. Use your own photography. If you want to take pictures of stuff, that kind of stuff really goes well. And a picture of yourself. I know guys who put pictures of themselves operating in their stations. They work real well. That's a good QSL to use. Local scenery, and the other thing I can tell you is it's great to be patriotic, but you don't want to overdo this. I mean, you can offend some of these people. I mean, in this day and age of being politically correct about everything, the last thing they want to do is, eat another sandwich about how good the U.S. is about this thing, how, the Eagles and all of that other stuff. So be careful about that. It's nice. You can put your American flag on there somewhere or whatever, but don't overdo it. That's another trick thing. And then here's the big one. Avoid emblems and insignias that are not ham radio related. You'll find people putting religious organizations. They'll be putting all kinds of other stuff on their cards, and they may be a member of some patriotic group or something like that, and they're putting that on their card. And you got to realize that to you it's an important thing. To that person, it may be offensive. And why take the risk? So the easiest thing is just simply keep that kind of stuff off your card. Just make it a nice card, a pretty picture of something, a photograph of yourself, a picture of your equipment, your station, that kind of stuff. But avoid, and now one of the things that used to come out of the Eastern European countries back in the 60s and 70s was a lot of pornography. A lot of those guys were sending cards that were really off color. I mean, seriously off color. And the other thing is that what I remember about a lot of the DX contacts that I made back in the 60s and 70s, and even into the 80s, before the end of the Soviet bloc, before that, I would get at least 2 out of every 5 contacts I would make, I would get a request for a Playboy magazine. It was almost always a request for Playboys. That they really wanted that sent to send in there, and you would get that request on CW especially. You'd get a lot of requests for Playboy magazines. So anyway, now Ron's going to get up and he's going to show you his. Now this is the kind of thing what I'm saying about when people when they really get into this paper QSLing and it becomes a big part of the hobby to you, you do stuff like this. Go ahead, Ron.
Thanks, Terry.
Is this your Playboy magazine collection?
I wish. I forgot that tonight. As you know, Terry and I are the same age. We both got our license back in '62. And I take QSLing very seriously. I have 5 DXCCs. Each DXCC is in a book, such as this. And I brought just the one from Lebanon. I was operating in Lebanon in 1978 during the war. And one thing that he brings up is, how would I get my cards in Lebanon? Any idea? What would I do? Put Ron Payne, American Embassy, Beirut? Well, the airport's closed. It's during the war. So how would I get my cards? It was OD5MX, QSL to WA6YOU. I would send my logs home to my parents every month, and they would either do the cards. And there were times when my parents actually got a bag from the mailman, a bag of QSLs. Every one looking something like that. And inside, maybe $2, $3. So this book is from Lebanon. What's that?
They retired on that?
Yeah, just about. So this one has that I worked in 133 countries from 78 to 79. I have a picture of my station. And by the way, guys, I ran an FT7. I ran 13 watts into a dipole from Beirut. But my apartment was across the street from the Mediterranean Ocean. And how many CW operators in Lebanon in 1978?
Not many.
2. OD5LX and OD5MX. And I have my card. Terry mentioned about specialty cards. Look at this. I got Arabic on mine, man. It says 73s and best regards in Arabic. So this was a big deal. And my eyeball QSO that I handed out to people also had Arabic on it. My license is in here from Beirut. It's in French and Arabic, and it's Albi, monsieur. Albi for life. I can go back to Beirut, and I'm still OD5MX. I was a member of the Radio Amateur
Union.
Like the ARRL, doesn't it? Radio Amateur Society of Lebanon. And then all my cards for the 133 countries are in order using picture corners. And this is a special paper that won't turn the cards brown, and the special UV plastic.
Do you have each card in there twice, so you have one from the front? And
No,
one
if you
from
want
the
to
back?
look at it, Ray, I'll take it out for you.
No,
But you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. You could do that, but I have them all in here, and I have some rare ones. And King Hussein's brother, right there, JY3, ZH. But everything's in here, guys. All the Russian cards. Terry was mentioning how cool the Russian cards were. Sorry, Soviet Union cards. And they were all very picture the Soyuz here. And
Of course, that was back when all the Russian cards went to P.O. Box 73, Moscow. That was the Box 88. Box 88, Moscow. That was the only way you could get a card. There was no direct mail to anybody in any of the Soviet bloc countries.
But Ron,
yes.
this isn't really as good as LOTW.
Don't get me started. Now, I have the other book. I have 4 other books. The one from the United States, I have 309 cards in, so it's about that thick. India. How would you get a card in India? He mentioned India, third world country. By golly, before you leave, get yourself a QSL manager. So my QSL manager for my 4 years in New Delhi, I was VU2YOU. My QSL manager was Carl Rentz, K4YT. So this is VU2YOU, QSL to K4YT. I would send Carl my logs through the mail, everything went through diplomatic pouch, by the way, to third world. All my mail came in diplomatic, all my mail went out diplomatic. But boy, it was nice to get a big box of cards in. And when I got home from India, I had probably 6 shoe boxes full of cards. I put together all the necessary awards, got them done, and then I shredded all the rest of the cards. Sorry about that. But anyway, any questions, guys? I take this very serious. I love my cards. I've spent a fortune on the 5 books. If there's a fire in the house, these go first. You guys, anytime you want to come up and see this or come over to the house, I'll show you all the other ones from Somalia, India, Philippines, Lebanon, and the United States.
You got to make some contacts, though. That's the problem. Is that and that's the issue. Is that most of the operators in this day and age don't have. A lot of people live in townhouses, apartments, things like that, and it's not conducive to the big. And even in the DXpedition or the DX world, it's not like I'm not trying to imply contesting. But it's competitive. I mean, you get something that comes that's really rare that comes on the air, and the pileups are astronomical, and you've got to have some serious horsepower to get through that pileup, and it takes big arrays and it takes power to do that, or you're going to have to catch them on the. A lot of these DXpeditions, the first, if they're there 10 days. The first 6 or 7 days, they're overwhelmed with stations calling them. And sometimes the 7th and 8th days, things will be good enough. The smaller, the 100-watt wire antenna stations start to get through. Seldom will you see a QRP station get through. It's just, they're just not going to make it. With 5 watts or less and a wire antenna, it's pretty much an insurmountable ask. There were a lot of stations that you would work, and back then you'd often hear people say, "I QSL 100%," and that was exactly the case. And back when we used to do, I mean, I used to take a lot of cards out of here. I mean, when we were doing this, I would take a stack of cards like that every month home with me, and it was, people used to do it. I mean, they would give you, every station they worked overseas or a DX station, they would send a card, and I would get them, and we would be able to send them up there, and they'd eventually get them. They'd get their return cards. So, but that, again, that's all changed. That whole thing has changed, and LOTW is even doing more to change that.